So welcome everyone. Let's bow in. As we proceed through the Buddhist path of awakening, we are making our way through the 3-volume set of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. These volumes are digests of talks given by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche over the course of 15 years. Every year he would take a group of students, usually 150 to 250 students, on a retreat for 3 months in the fall. And they would go to some place or a hotel or resort that often was located in a resort area. And so in the fall was perhaps a ski area that was unoccupied, off season. And they would go through the Tibetan teachings, which are divided into 3 sections, 3 vehicles, they're called, the yanas in Sanskrit. The lesser vehicle, or as Trungpa Rinpoche preferred it, the foundational vehicle, the greater vehicle, the Mahayana, and the adamantine or indestructible vehicle, the Vajrayana. We are on volume 2 of these digested and edited talks, which is the Mahayana. And tonight we are going to be discussing the transcendent virtue, the paramita of the Bodhisattva, the 3rd paramita, which is patience. We've already covered generosity and discipline, and perhaps we'll review them a little bit as we go along. So tonight, Barry is going to lead off, and I turn it over to you, Barry.
Well, okay. So, the paramita of patience. Just reading from what he says here in the beginning. In the Buddhist tradition, the paramita of patience, or Kshanti paramita, means that you are not perturbed by any samsaric conditions. I think there's an interesting little distinction to make here. You're not perturbed by samsaric conditions. This doesn't mean that you are untouched by anything that happens in the world, that you're so removed that nothing matters to you or doesn't touch you, but that you are not moved by the kleshas, the confusion, the neuroticisms, the things that come up, the samsaric conditions. He says it means that you bear your existence. You hold it as it is. You stay where you are. So the analogy for patience is the ocean. Whatever happens, the ocean cannot be disturbed. So there's a real sense of stability here. The Tibetan term for patience is sopa, which means forbearance. Sanskrit, it's kshanti, which means having equilibrium. And I would like to point out that forbearance can have a connotation of resignation or indifference or even anger or rejection. So I prefer to think of having equilibrium. But in any case, he says, you are willing to wait for the harmoniousness of a situation to arise by not correcting the disharmony, like waiting for good weather to happen. Now, there are certainly situations in which engaging actively is called for, but we're frequently thrown off balance and participate in inappropriate ways in situations or events where that is not the case. Like If you get stuck in traffic or just a vivid memory from the past captures your attention, or is even a simple distraction, that with patience there is a kind of stability, as I said. When action is not called for, you can just wait. With Kshanti, he says, you are able to practice your shamatha vipassana discipline in the middle of Grand Central Station, or Times Square, maybe. And of course, again, this is not by zoning out into some kind of trance state, but by holding your seat with an awareness of what's going on. Now, the whole next section here is about overcoming aggression, and there's a lot of emphasis on this. He says the Buddhist meaning of patience is freedom from aggression. This is a terrific pith description of this paramita, the absence of aggression. That even implies that patience may be not so much a thing to acquire, but something that can occur naturally in the absence of aggression. And he says the main obstacle to patience is anger. According to the sutras, there is no greater evil than aggression, and there is no greater practice than patience. So, there you have it. Clearly, aggression is the antithesis of patience, and vice versa. Aggression is the most dangerous emotion, he says, because it does not allow for any form of gentleness. One instant of aggression can destroy your connection with the world. What a statement. One instant of aggression can destroy your connection with the world. You see, if you're manifesting aggression, you're blinded. You're not listening anymore. You're not seeing what is actually going on. There is no prajna, no skillful means. You are relating with everything as other. You have ceded control to the ego. So, goodbye shamatha. Goodbye shunyata. You're no longer there. And that also goes for, as he says, your dedication to relative and absolute bodhicitta principles. Because, of course, there is no possibility of compassion where there is aggression. Aggression is absolutely terrible, he says. It is anti-Mahayana. Passion, lust, and desire may have qualities of neurosis, and they may destroy your mindfulness and awareness. These are the three poisons, after all. But at the same time, they have the nature of acceptance, which I found intriguing, because I had thought of passion and aggression as being more or less equal, but there is a kind of acceptance there in lust and passion because you are drawn to it and you are drawing it to you. So, but aggression, as he says, is based on total rejection towards yourself or aggression toward other sentient beings. Now, as he just said, this can be aggression toward yourself. It can be self-hatred, self-doubt, punishing yourself. I've heard it said that the closest thing to original sin of Buddhism is self-hatred. But in Buddhism, it is not a mortal sin. You are not damned forever. It is an error, a lapse. When you realize that you have had a lapse, acted aggressively, he says, the answer is not to punish yourself. After all, that is just more aggression. Patience, he says, means that you wait a minute. You wait and see what happens. It means not coming to conclusions too quickly. I'll go into this a little more in a bit. Just because you've indulged, you should not panic. Just wait. Be patient. Be patient with yourself. Now, he talks about the pattern in the paramitas. The paramita of patience continues the pattern of alternating shamatha and vipassana through the paramitas. So the first paramita, generosity, is connected with shamatha. Shamatha because it is about resting in openness. Right? The second paramita, discipline, is connected with vipassana, and I take this as being because it is about taking action. It is about ways in which you relate to the rest of the world. And then with the third paramita, we're back to shamatha. But as we will see, a different level of shamatha. Patience, he says, is a way to quell the heat of aggression by following the way of shamatha, tranquility and peacefulness. But it is a highly advanced level of shamatha discipline. So shamatha is all about holding your seat, peacefully abiding. And the meaning changes as we progress along the path, starting with meditation on the cushion and in the Hinayana, and then meditation in daily life. And then in the paramita of patience, it is a transcendent version of shamatha. As he said in the beginning, you can meditate in the middle of Grand Central Station. And there is also a kind of in the pattern of the paramitas and the way they relate to each other, there's also a leveling up within the paramitas themselves as you go from one to the next. He says, as we go on to higher and higher levels of paramitas, the standard of shamatha and vipassana escalates. So the paramita of patience involves a higher level of shamatha than the paramita of generosity. And by the way, shamatha, as we're seeing here, is not some kind of preliminary beginner practice that you start out with and then leave behind. Shamatha vipassana continues on a long way down the path. I'm not sure how far, but we've got a long way to go before we're done with that. It just changes the meaning and experience of it. Now, he says the sequence of paramitas is significant. Generosity is the stripping off process, and discipline is remaining in loneliness. Having gone through those two processes, we find our situation unbearable, as if we were being beaten by hundreds of people. Now, frankly, I have some difficulty with this bit here. I have difficulty bringing my own experience to it, the kind of pain he describes. So perhaps this could be a topic for the meeting, for the discussion at the end or tomorrow's meeting. But that said, here's my take on it. First of all, with dana, with generosity, we are stripping away our attachments. In the chapter on generosity a little earlier, he said, this may be painful because you are used to putting ourselves first. Ever since you were a child, you have been building up your ego. But the Buddhist approach is completely the opposite, so it might hurt. Okay. And then in the previous chapter on discipline, Shila, there is this. Having already stripped off attachments, you end up as a simple, straightforward, naked child without compassion, without companions. Discipline makes you a lonely person. You cannot cry to anybody because nobody will come to get you. And you cannot ask for milk because there are no nipples. So discipline is a real appreciation of loneliness. And I think in this case, appreciation isn't necessarily the positive definition of that, but it is appreciation meaning coming to fully understand, to appreciate that you are truly alone. So, and with the paramita of discipline, you do not turn away from that loneliness. So, this can certainly stir things up emotionally and possibly be a very painful experience. So then with the paramita of patience, there is no longer a need to do anything about that pain or discomfort or confusion. You can simply remain. Now, he says, otherwise, that pain can lead to, nope, that's not him, that's me. Otherwise, experiencing that pain can lead to resentment and anger. And anger narrows our vision. It constricts everything. It sucks all of the air out of the room, so to speak. He says, when you have a burst of aggression, that makes everything dry and terribly unproductive. You may have cultivated the soil, sowed the seeds, watered the ground beautifully, but aggression destroys the whole thing. And by the way, well, no, I was going to go back into this phrase about sowing seeds, which it's a simile he's used in the past, but I'll leave it at that. So when you're angry, he says, you reject both other people and yourself. At that point, you have no connection with the Dharma at all. Once again, aggression, anger is the enlightenment killer. And anger is contagious. What about when you're the recipient of anger? Now, we just talked about how manifesting anger or aggression denies the possibility of enlightenment. He says, if you reverse the logic, when somebody is angry with you and you are patient with that person, you are creating 1,000 kalpas of merit on the spot. Now, a kalpa is some vast amount of time, like the age of the universe. Point is, it's a tremendous mitzvah, you might say. He says, when somebody is angry, this is your chance to be patient. Now, it's not always so easy. I mean, reacting to another person's anger happens very quickly, but there is an opportunity to cut through the chain reaction of tit for tat. And even in the midst of anger, there can be a spark of recognition, recognizing that you're angry. And at that moment, there's a possibility of a choice. He says you could breathe in the anger. He's talking about receiving anger here. You could breathe in the anger, and not only that, you could project goodness. Now, this, of course, is Tonglen. And this may sound far-fetched, but it is possible. The same internal alarm clock that wakes you up during meditation is always active. These sparks of recognition happen all the time, even in the most compelling situations. We couldn't survive without that. So, in a moment of recognition of this kind, it is possible to respond as one does during meditation when recognizing that you're thinking. You could see the anger and refrain from reacting. One of my favorite little pith instructions is, don't get mad, get curious. So, clarity. One of the best things about patience, one of the best things about anger and patience, it is very sharp and clear. It speaks for itself. Anger is anger, patience is patience. You see, even if anger is subtle, it can be easily identified, is what we're saying here. It stands out. Anger is to the emotions like vision is to the senses. It's the most vivid, energetic, powerful, can't miss it. Now, here's another part I had a little difficulty with. He says, at times, aggression may be legitimate, such as when others are doing something wrong and you lose your temper in order to stop them. But then he says, but basically it is not appropriate to apply anger unless you are in the role of teacher. Now, I'm sure John could relate examples of having experienced this with Chogyam Trungpa, and I have experienced it from teachers. But this is a different kind of anger or aggression. There is no intent to harm or injure. The intent is to help or protect. It is a form of aggression that requires great skill and must come from the heart of compassion. You might say a kind of fierce love. Like if you saw your child starting to walk out into the street, you could be very aggressive in stopping it. And there might be a great deal of anger in the moment, but the anger is not at the child, of course. So anger may be obvious or subtle, he's saying, but whether you are expressing anger in subtle or obvious ways, the point is to get rid of the anger at the very first opportunity. Any method that quells aggression is valid. You might even need to manifest your anger first, if that helps, and develop patience afterward. You don't have to be genteel about the whole thing. So, blowing off steam, maybe, I guess, but this is very tricky territory. The point being, I think, though, to take away from this, the importance of not allowing anger or aggression to fully manifest. That any way that you can nip it in the bud or just simply not go there at all, do it. It is certainly not to be taken as license to be aggressive. And at this point, I would like to say something about this, that in this discussion, anger and aggression are synonymous. But anger is an energy, and aggression is acting on that energy. And energy without aggression is possible. Experiencing that distraction is not so easy, but it can happen. It can happen where there is one of those sparks of recognition that we spoke of earlier. And if that happens, there is an opportunity to transform the situation by cutting the storyline. Anger consumes the storyline like fire consumes fuel. So cutting the storyline of aggression can leave one with the energy of anger, but no desire to do harm. But if you continue to feed this anger with the storyline, with all the good reasons you have for being angry and all the memories that come up that you can relate to it, then, well, it can break out and burn the house down, so to speak. Let me see, we're running a little late here. So, well, he says you develop patience and forbearance in order to maintain a quality of continued virtue. Such virtue is based on the idea of basic goodness and a sense that you are a worthy person, a healthy person. This is something good to keep in mind when considering the possibility of deploying anger or aggression. And then finally, before I turn this over to John, the Maras. And Mara was in the mythology, was an evil demon, and Maras were deployed against the Buddha to interfere with his attaining enlightenment. Their temptations, their seductions. And by the way, in the legend of the Buddha, these Maras were deployed against him, and they were seductions, they were sexy women, various kinds of seductions and temptations. And these, he had to overcome these before he was able to proceed through the night to achieve enlightenment. And we have to overcome these to progress along the path. They are fundamentally aggressive, directly interfering with our connection to the Dharma. So, briefly, there's the seduction Mara, which is based on attachment or pleasure and richness. It is a kind of, he says, softness or candy bar approach based on calculated aggression against discipline and patience, which could be called a setting sun approach. Now, elsewhere, he refers to this Mara as son of the gods. So it is not simply being tempted by something delicious or some shiny new toy. It is an active state of mind. And he refers to setting sun, which is a term from the Shambhala teachings. And it is an approach to life of seeking luxury and ignoring reality, of making messes and leaving it to someone else to clean up, of pleasure seeking while denying cost. And it is willful, not passive. So, as he said, calculated and aggressive. Then we have the Mara of the Kleshas, kleshas are the confused emotions, and I think this is pretty obvious, but he does say accompanied by a sense of aggression. So once again, it's not passive. Then there is the Skanda, Mara of Skanda, which skandhas, which are experiences giving rise to false sense of self, are a more subtle manifestation of aggression I'm reading here, whereas the kleshas are more direct and obvious. So the skandhas are developmental mental states, and they are realms you inhabit mentally. So not quite as sharp and pointed as kleshas, but nonetheless, to the extent you're absorbed in these, then you're definitely not progressing. And then finally, there is the god of death, the fourth Mara, the fear of death and the attempt to overcome death and not get old. And in general, just denying death, not really being aware of the fact that all there really is this ever-changing moment that you're inhabiting. And at some point, it's going to end. So at this point, this is ending. John? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Barry. And I need to change the view here in the recording. In any event, we'll just start and see if this will switch by itself.
Yeah, I'll highlight you.
Thank you. So really, this is what patience is about, is overcoming a particular form of egotism, ego. The Mahayana path altogether is about overcoming ego. In fact, the entrance to the Mahayana path, the very first stage, the first bhumi, is the discovery of shunyata, emptiness. And what is emptiness about? It's about empty of anything having any true existence, I or other. Utter egolessness. Our normal mode of operation, our confused mode of operation, is we're constantly thinking about me, I. And when we do, or when we are oriented that way, we are caught up in the three poisons, as Barry pointed out: passion, aggression, and ignorance. And of those three, the most pernicious is aggression. Ignorance is kind of neutral. Passion has some appreciation of other, in that you want to draw it to you to make your existence better. But aggression is all about destruction of other. And we're all very familiar with this feeling. Someone hurts us, they insult us, they treat us badly, they don't do what we expected them to do for us. And we feel hurt. Aggression is very much connected with the feeling of hurt in ego. Ego's hurt, that I have been hurt. And so I'm going to strike out. I'm going to draw this other person or person's attention to the fact that they've hurt me and ask them to redress the problem, or maybe force them to, or maybe hurt them in kind, strike back. And that kind of aggression is very destructive. And it involves, as Barry pointed out, anger and aggression. And the Buddha felt that of the three poisons, passion, aggression, and stupidity or indifference, aggression was the most harmful, because it really has to do with wanting to destroy the other and affirmation of the predominance of I, ego. And really what we're about here in the Mahayana is moving into a different kind of understanding of the world. That this world is not an I-other proposition revolving around me. It's an open dimension. And in that open dimension, we can feel the virtues of compassion and all the rest. And these virtues that we're discussing here, compassion, discipline, and now patience, these are transcendent virtues. They're not ordinary: generosity, discipline, and patience. These are transcendent. Transcendent means beyond I, not having to do with me, but having to do with an openness and reality. Overcoming aggression, patience, freedom from aggression. And the main obstacle is anger. We get triggered into anger. And anger is the way in which we express our aggression. Patience means forbearance, that we're willing to bear any problem, that we have equilibrium, and we're not giving in to the discursiveness or chaos that our minds can descend into in a moment of anger and then we act aggressively. So it's really asking us to come back from aggression. Now, the first thing is we have to not be aggressive towards ourselves. So when we find ourselves being angry, sometimes, you get angry perhaps with someone you love. They've hurt you. They've slighted you. They haven't paid enough attention to you, whatever it might be. And then you feel bad about yourself for having foisted this on them, for having committed an act of anger or aggression toward them. The first thing we do is we just stop doing it to ourselves. We have to develop compassion, openness, absence of aggression toward ourselves. And that means seeing the anger, seeing that aggression non-judgmentally and letting it go. And it will go by itself. If we try to get rid of it, it becomes another act of aggression directed now against ourselves. And we just get lost in this morass of endless aggression towards ourselves, towards the other. So what we do is we practice awareness, seeing it, just seeing it, letting it be, and coming back to a kind of openness. Now, in the rest of this chapter, he talks about really ways of dealing with aggression. He calls them the three categories of patience. But ultimately, what these are methods of dealing with aggression. Because aggression is the antithesis of patience. Patience means overcoming aggression. That you can let it be and dissolve. The first category he calls overcoming other people's destructiveness. This is a strategy, really. And it's relative truth, not absolute, meaning it doesn't have to do so much with shunyata as it does with understanding your mind and working with that. And the point of this is that if you don't respond to aggression, others' aggression or your own, you will stop encouraging it. If you respond, if you start thinking about how am I going to get even? How am I going to point this out to that person that they've done this to me? How am I going to make this situation right? Then you foment, you increase, you encourage the other person's aggression as well. So if you don't respond with your own aggression, he says, you will stop encouraging them and no longer be under attack. This is a strategy for how to deal with aggression when it comes to you. That aggression can be very passive. It can be active. It might be someone not giving you the deference or the attention that you feel that they should, which is a passive form of aggression from your point of view. You feel hurt. You feel slighted. It could be active. They could be insulting you. They could be hurting you. They could be kicking you out. They could be doing all kinds of things. Either way, if you don't respond with your own aggression, it cuts the ground out from under the whole situation of aggression, back and forth, the warfare, the battle. He says the other side will no longer have a reference point for their aggression. If you resist, then you are a solid rock for them to punch, and they will become more aggressive. If you don't resist, then you become a pile of balloons, and there's nothing to fight, and they don't aggress further. So this is a strategy, a painful and difficult strategy. When you're hurt and you feel that anger and aggression, and you want to strike back, it's very compelling. And this requires enormous awareness and self-control, not to aggress in return. Because if you do, you will just keep the battle going, feed it. Whereas if you don't, if you just accept that pain that they've caused you, that situation has caused you, without complaint, then you diffuse it. The second category of patience is called realizing the nature of other people's aggression. And this means understanding. It's not, the first one is just simply a tactic, how to respond or not. The second one means that you actually begin to understand this other person, where they're coming from. You realize that their aggression is caused by some form of pain, one form or another. So we have patience with the nature of suffering. He gives the Tibetan Duknal Ki Ngowo Sopa. Duknal is suffering. Ki is a possessive particle. Ngowo means nature. And Sopa is patience. So it's the patience of understanding the nature of suffering. He says people can't help themselves when they are aggressive. They are swept away by it, aren't we all? You feel furious, you feel hurt. You want the other person to know, and perhaps even suffer correspondingly. So you shouldn't regard aggression as an attack, but as an uncontrollable neurosis, and develop patience with the individual or individuals perpetrating that aggression toward you, rather than reacting with your own aggression. The patience is to let be. And in letting it be, you can diffuse it. And the reason you can let be is because you begin, it's especially easier if you begin to understand where that person is coming from, what is producing that painful behavior, painful to you. He says, the person perpetrating the aggression, they have no control over their minds, which are dominated by ignorance. Ignorance in this sense meaning habitual patterns of neuroticism. So they attack you unreasonably, even though you might be trying to help them. Their aggression, you see, is the result, their aggression towards you, when people are aggressive towards you, is the result of them seeing you falsely. They're seeing you through a veil of their own preconceptions. Freud called this seeing people through the veil of defense mechanisms. You've been hurt in the past, and now you've built up a strategy for defending yourself from that kind of hurt. And when you think, rightly or wrongly, that you're about to be hurt in that way again, those defense mechanisms spring up. And suddenly you see that person through the filter of your past experience, whether it's right or wrong. And 9 times out of 10, it's wrong, because you're seeing it as through a preconception, something that was conceived in the past, and you're laying this veil of interpretation on that person. So aggression is the result of them seeing you falsely, and it's the result, and then your counter-aggression is the result of you seeing them falsely through the veil of preconception, or as Freud called them, defense mechanisms. He says such aggression can be overcome by analysis, through which you realize that their aggression is capable of being understood and overcome. It takes a lot of work. You have to really understand that other person. You have to do some research. You have to know them. Perhaps, sometimes it's patently obvious, if you want to pay attention, where the aggression is coming from when it comes toward you, and when it comes from you toward them. He says, in such situations, you could step back and examine the nature of suffering. When you understand that suffering is created by you, by others, or by the situation, those 3 possibilities, you do not react unreasonably. You begin to understand where this is coming from, this suffering, this unhappiness, because aggression always produces suffering from one side or both. When you have studied and practiced meditation, when you have understood suffering and its origin and the nature of aggression, you become much more reasonable than those who never heard of such things. So you're learning strategies of how to deal with aggression, your own, especially your own, and others, and how to talk yourself and others out of aggression. And this is what it means to become more patient, more open. To be reactive is the reverse, the opposite of being patient. He says you develop patience in order to relate to personal discomfort, and you're willing to experience it. That's the thing. Without patience, we immediately react to personal discomfort, pain, unhappiness, the aggression, the hurt that we feel, with a counter aggression. So what patience means is we have to be willing to bring our awareness to it, to simply see it as it is without judgment, clearly. He says you don't cop out because of pain, but you realize the temporary inconveniences and discomfort that temporary inconveniences and discomforts are a necessary part of life. You are also patient with the discomfort that arises in post-meditation, such as the pain, well, it's the same thing, pain of talking to an irritating person. You understand who and what people are, and you don't want to cause pain to anybody. And you're learning to understand their distress. So this patience is really transcendent of the whole notion of I, me, my egotism, my benefit, me. That's why it's a transcendent virtue, a paramita. It creates enormous space, openness, intelligence, understanding, allows the space for us to understand what's actually going on. Finally, we get to the last category of dealing with patience called individually examining. And this is connected with ultimate truth. And he says, you examine all your irritations individually and find that they are empty by nature. They're just dreams. They are dreams of I and other. They are stories which we tell ourselves. I mean, they are literally, in order to have that feeling of aggression, you have to be telling yourself the story. That person did this to me, and they shouldn't have, and they are not appreciating me fully, or they're not taking me into account with kindness. And you tell this story, and it arouses your sense of being hurt, and it arouses your desire to strike back. That's what has to be dissolved into awareness in this present moment, into the awareness of what really is real, not the dream of the story we tell ourselves, which is such a familiar story. We've told it to ourselves over and over again so many times. Think of one and how familiar it is. Yes. Yeah. We've done it over and over again, and we each have our particularly idiosyncratic versions of those stories that we've learned in the course of our particularly idiosyncratic lives that have the color of me, John and Don and Karen Sue and Deborah and Kim and Robert and all the rest. We each have our own flavors of these stories of how I've been wronged, how I should be treated. So really what this category is about is beginning to be aware of the repetitiveness and the arbitrariness and the fictional quality of those stories and to see through it. He says, you examine all your irritations individually and find that they are empty by nature. That means they're just stories. Whenever irritations or aggressions are encountered, they are reminders of your existence. So when you begin to feel aggressive towards somebody and you're hurt and you're feeling, you can just bring it to awareness. And suddenly you're aware, I'm here. This is here. He says, so you should constantly examine and understand the nature of irritation, which produces the aggression. Gradually, you begin to realize that the irritations occurring in your life do not have to be regarded as an attack. Wow, that's something. Because they go on and on and on, don't they? They come back to us to plague us. He says, they don't mean that you are having a bad life and being punished for it. You can still appreciate the basic goodness of your life, that you possess Sugatagarbha. Sugatagarbha is another word for Buddha nature, that we are fundamentally wholesome, good, awake people. You could include the irritations within your practice of patience. Because if you try to get rid of them, that's an act of aggression towards yourself. You can see them with awareness. All of this has to do with meditation from the very get-go. When we practice generosity, it's because we become present and we can give what we had formerly been clinging to. When we practice discipline, it's because we come present and we can behave properly in every situation, or in a given situation. We can pick up our fork properly and put it in our mouths properly. We can say hello properly. And when we practice patience, we are practicing that awareness to include but not act on our irritations, our impulses toward aggression, with kindness to ourselves and others. In this open awareness of the Bodhisattva path, this open awareness, this growing appreciation that the stories we tell about I are just that, stories, and that they can be given up with a return to awareness here and now. It says meditation itself can produce a lot of irritation, boredom, and facing your own mind for an extended period of time. Solitary retreat. He used to call that the opportunity to meet your own mind. Xin Yi is in retreat right now. You could do Tonglen for her, those of you who know her. 2-week retreat. Let's see. So he says you could practice forbearance. You could apply Tonglen when you are irritated. You could do it for yourself. When you feel this irritation and aggression and anger coming up because you've been hurt, do Tonglen for yourself. Breathe in that suffering, that dark, angry, tumultuous, hot, irritated feeling, and breathe out to yourself. Buddha nature, awake, kindness, understanding of where your irritation has come from, how it's a pattern that you've had for years and years, and yet it never really happened. It was just a dream that we create in the moment. Finally, I'll read this quote. When you have an understanding of shunyata, egolessness, or spiritual materialism, you might get tired of so many ideas coming into your head since you are soaked in the teachings already. With patience, you do not block those ideas, but continuously explore your understanding. Discursive thoughts on the Dharma should be encouraged. And I remember years ago, Trungpa Rinpoche telling us, at some point, all your thoughts will be thoughts about the Dharma, about the teachings. So in conclusion, how are we doing on time? Getting there. So you realize that patience is the only means that will carry you through the vicissitudes, the difficulties of aggression, hurt, anger. You could act with relaxation, humor, and fundamental non-aggression. You have to develop the first two paramitas, generosity and discipline. All of them have to do with a greater and greater coming into awareness and shifting your allegiance from dream to this present moment, to this awareness here and now, letting go, floating free into now. He says, but you have already given up territory as an aspect of your practice of the paramita of generosity, and you already have become softer through the experience of the paramita of discipline, of paying attention to what's happening in your life. There is no problem, if that's the case, there is no problem when you come to the third level, the paramita of patience. The tendency toward suppression of aggression, that tendency we have to, when you feel aggressive, you feel bad, you feel like I'm a bad person, and you want to stuff it down. And that tendency has been undermined by Maitri, kindness to oneself, which goes together with awareness of oneself, and generosity, which is why the whole thing works, he says. This paramita practice, he says, is a perfectly worked out progression from generosity to discipline to patience. It's like we're getting more and more and more into emptiness, into shunyata, which is to say, into now, into the real world. So patience here doesn't mean to hold off or hold on, like gritting your teeth, and holding on by your fingernails. Quite the opposite. It means opening up into awareness. He says it means you give in and feel the full flavor of the situation. And then finally, the fruition of patience or forbearance is the development of extraordinary protection. Protection from aggression. The practitioner cannot be harmed by any obstacles. Why? You are not putting out any aggression, therefore you are not inviting any aggression. Quite the opposite, you are beginning to generate peace and kindness by resting in the real, in now. The main point of this teaching is that we should not be overwhelmed by aggression and just act out and go crazy. And if we do, then you begin be kind to yourself about that. Come back to awareness about that and not practice aggression toward yourself. He says we're learning to understand samsara, neurosis, thoroughly. This is a map that's been given us by the Buddha, and how to work with every confused samsaric situation without regarding it as a personal attack. How many times have we done that? Regarded things as a very personal attack. On the whole, when faced with samsaric upheavals, you should remain patient, open, clear, here, aware. The message of the paramita of patience, that is the message. He says you could just be, you could remain as a seated Buddha. So we could have a discussion on these paramitas, these transcendent virtues, transcendent of egotism, self and other, and all of the neurosis that moves between the two, or the three, or the four, or the five.
I had a question.
Who's that?
Meg.
Meg.
Yeah, I wondered if you consider self-doubt to be an aggression.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, in some of the tantric teachings, it's identified as the worst form of aggression. Because if you practice that toward yourself, you will do it to others. In the tantric teachings, it's personified as a demon, self-doubt. And that demon is called the Gyalgan. It's the worst. And it's the job of wisdom, transcendent wisdom, the most wrathful aspect of wisdom, to butcher is the word that's used in the text, to butcher the Gyalgan, to butcher self-doubt. And I remember Trungpa Rinpoche in a lecture more than once saying, as Barry quoted him, self-doubt is the Buddhist version of original sin. It's the flaw from which all others manifest. When you don't believe in yourself, you project it out onto others, people too. Self-hatred. So this path is all about overcoming self-doubt. Yeah, it's really beautiful because all of us have self-doubt. That's the very nature of ego. Ego is self-doubt. The nature of ego is self-doubt because ego doesn't really exist. It's a lie. And we tell ourselves, and so we know automatically that it doesn't exist. So we have this self-doubt about me, I, and we're constantly trying to buttress up this belief in I, when in fact we know at core that it's just a fiction. And I'll give you an example. Barry said of Trungpa Rinpoche manifesting enlightened anger. When I first met him, that first summer, he was giving a talk one day about egolessness, anatma. And at the end of the talk, during the Q&A, I raised my hand. I was sitting in the first or second row. And I said, well, don't you kind of need ego, this sense of I, just to get through the practical considerations of your day, paying your bill, turning right at a stop sign or whatever? He leaned forward in his chair and with his eyes bulging, I scared the shit out of me. He bellowed, ego is a lie. I've never forgotten it. It stayed with me all these years, 50 years. There's anger, and then in the next instant, it was gone. So self-doubt, yeah. Self-doubt is the Buddhist version of original sin. So it's like a slogan, you could write it on your refrigerator. Thank you. Great. That question has insight in it. Tony.
John, thank you. I haven't, one of the things that comes up for me is about expectations. And, one of the things that we are mindful of, particularly in recovery, is that an expectation is a premeditated resentment. And resentments, I think, in many ways fit fairly well into this whole scenario of anger. I remember seeing Pema Chodron many years ago at St. John the Divine. She walked onto the stage in full robes. And the first thing she said was, a resentment is like me taking poison and hoping you die. I was sort of amazed by that. And I mentioned that to a sober mentor of mine. He said, well, I'm from the Midwest. He said, what we say out there is, it's like piss in your pants. He said, only you can feel it, but everyone else can see it, So that's a little bit of humorous side. But what I wanted to say is that the word resentment doesn't really come up during the course of this teaching with patients, but the word reasonable comes up for us. It's almost a definition also of being in recovery is that you become reasonable. So we actually, I think over the course of time, do a lot of work in this particular area. So again, I want to thank you for the teachings, John. And it's been really, I think the thing that came out really clearly for me tonight was when you have a lapse, don't punish yourself. That is simply more aggression. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. It's beautiful. Thank you. Brings it home. AA is such a help. Who knew? Back in the 70s when we first got into this, we didn't know about Alcoholics Anonymous, the big book, And now it seems like, it just fits so beautifully.
Christy has her hand up.
Yes, I hope my internet holds. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, John. I wondered if, and maybe Barry, you could say it again, and maybe John, you could put your spin on this. I'm still getting my head around the connection with the paramitas and shamatha vipassana, and how that, I guess, the quality that we're teasing out that with generosity that relates to shamatha, and I just want to hear that again and see if it will resonate with me in a different way. Maybe if you say it again in a different way, Barry.
Well,
Thank you.
Actually, I had a little difficulty with that too. Maybe John should.
Maybe hearing from.
I have difficulty with it too. I think the best way that I can take it is that it's a possibility for contemplation. Think about why it is, shamatha has to do with the cultivation of peace, whereas vipassana has to do with the cultivation of awareness. So if you consider the different paramitas in that light, shamatha literally means abiding in peace, the Tibetan shine, and vipassana means superior seeing. This is the English translation of those terms, literal. And so if you think about generosity and think about how does this mean abiding in peace? You're giving away, you're opening up, you're giving out. There's a sense of kindness and of actually a kind of sweetness and pleasure that comes. And whereas discipline has to do with how you pick up your knife and fork, how you greet someone, how you dress, how you handle your life, the details of your life, with awareness, with appreciation, with subtlety, intelligence. So perhaps this has more to do with awareness. You see, I'm trying to fit this in myself. And then patience, once again, has to do with this quality of letting be, of letting whatever it is come up without reactiveness, of abiding in peace. And that's the way I've been seeing it or thinking of it so far. Now, anybody, you can come up with your idea. Does that help at all, Christy?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of get them, shamatha and vipassana, flipped around, because shamatha to me.
Oops, you froze. We lost you, Christy.
Oops.
We'll never know.
Maybe she just got enlightened.
Could be. Internet enlightenment.
Can be, with
Christy?
gifted.
Oh, Christy.
Darn it.
We missed almost everything.
Yeah,
Okay.
we missed a lot because you're You're
I
fine.
hate it. I hate this. I can't figure out how to patience. Anyways, I don't know if you heard with shamatha, the precision aspect. Shamatha seems to me to be there's sort of a precision there that I could see maybe relating to like generosity and patience. And then Vipassana to me has the sense of a bigger, wider, expansive quality. So I mean, I'm just yeah. I think it has there's room for contemplation in sort of relating those things. I appreciate your interpretations. I'll play it against my own.
It definitely feels that Vipassana is more active and shamatha is more spacious and passive, not less active. You mean not passive, but less active, spacious. And that Vipassana has to do with the intelligence of appreciating all the nuances and details and being available to respond, you know, appropriately.
Okay.
That's the way I feel about it.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Both have to do with coming present and shifting one's loyalty from the dreams. Those dreams are all about aggression, one way or another. Even passion, when you are lustful, and passionate towards something and you want to consume it and draw it towards you, that's another form of aggression. Because you're not appreciating the thing as it is in its own right, you want to consume it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
Dan has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Barry. Thanks, John, so much. This was excellent. I don't know about anybody else, and I think that's partly why I'm saying it, in case anybody, feels the same or doesn't. But this, as compared to generosity and discipline, this paramita was much clearer to me because for me, there was less room for interpretation about what patience means. I recognize it. I can see that in myself. Where with generosity and discipline, I can put a spin on those things easier than I can with patience. It's very clear to me, that I'm impatient and I'm reacting to anger and I'm angry, and it has, when I am those things, it has to do with wanting to resolve something, with wanting to fix something, with wanting to satisfy something in myself. And without the self-doubt, I wouldn't have that. When I'm reacting to somebody in my story, it's I want to resolve, I want to straighten them out about their perception about me. And it's a very clear, I can see that myself much clearer than I can with the practice of generosity or ethics or discipline. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Well, that is in the reading, that a good thing about patience is that it's real clear.
Yeah, clarity.
Right.
And so is aggression.
Right.
Jane.
Where in the paramitas or somewhere else is fear addressed?
Fear is part of neurosis. The fear has to do with belief in self and a fear for self's well-being. So it's throughout. It's part of ego. Ultimately, the state of awakening, they say, one of its qualities is it's without fear, fearless. because there's nothing to be afraid for anymore. Just total absorption in the real, now, here.
And would you couple that with anxiety?
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, isn't it true when we're lost in fear and anxiety, we're thinking about me? This traveler, this fictional traveler, we're like Odysseus or something, trying to get home, out there meeting all these terrors, the Cyclops and Scylla and Charybdis and all the rest, that's what we think of ourselves when we become afraid or anxious.
And also, anxiety is the hallmark of suffering in general.
Jane, I want to say something. The question you just asked really made me think about the sensation of like what fear does in your body and how it like makes you. I mean, I feel it as closed, like myself closing off when I have fear. And the paramitas, I feel like, are asking us to really open, like each one. And like when we're really, exhibiting patience, or at least when I feel like I'm in a space of trying patience, I'm like, I feel myself trying to stay open, as opposed to closing down. I can feel sometimes it stretching my ability to stay open. So I don't know that that helps at all, but that's my experience with how fear relates to the paramitas, is maybe the difference between being closed and being open, and literally feeling it in your body, maybe in the heart center or the stomach, clenching and opening. So I don't know if that helps at all.
It's very helpful. Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
Judy, you're muted, Judy.
This is really a howl. As I was coming in to meditate and I sat down, the television was blaring and he didn't shut the door again. And I got up and I was so mad. I said, "What the fuck is it gonna take to get you to close a door?" And then I sit down and hear about patience. This is a howl. I so got it because because the whole thing was about that. It really was terrific. What a lesson. I thank you both very, very much. What a fun,
I'm sitting here thinking about all the ways that I have been triggered into aggression recently. Not that many, but there are some key ones, and I'll bet everybody in this room can come up with a story about how they've been triggered into anger and hurt and aggression and a feeling of being slighted or
yes, it's
or
all
wronged
there.
or something.
In his not closing the damn door and running the television full blast. It really, boy, what a great coincidence. I'm really just thrilled with
That's
this
great.
chat.
Thank you for being brave and telling us that.
That's great.
I've got things going on in my head about my aggression and my irritation, and I'll bet a lot of people here do.
Yeah, don't get me started.
The timing was just perfect.
Good.
Thank you for being brave.
Oh God.
I bet if we went around the room, everybody here could come up with an example of something like what Judy just. Dan said 10.
Oh, both Miriam and Valerie have something.
Okay.
Oh, and Mark.
Well, let's start with the first one you mentioned, Miriam, and then Valerie, and then Mark.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention mention quickly that I think the most, and thank you so much for these teachings, invaluable. So what resonated for me was response to anger through and dissipating it through self-compassion. So having an attitude of openness, receptivity to one's frustration and mounting tension, and then going, oh, yeah, get it, you know? And that seems to be so important in reducing the inner tension. And, you know, I think too, with fear and anxiety, we have to respect the inherent usefulness of that emotion and why it's with us. I mean, you're afraid when you think that you're in danger. You're afraid when you feel that your survival is at stake. And it served us well, right? The thing now is that we have to really check our perceptions. Am I really in danger? Is my survival really at stake? And, you know, just to undo that, because I find it very hard to reason against anxiety, you know, to say, well, it's a problem with this or with that. And instead, you got to work with your nervous system in a way and calm yourself down. And of course, when there is no self, then these emotions don't even appear. But that's a long-term goal, you know? And in the meantime, we just have these opportunities to exercise those paramitas. And it's a great exercise. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the key is just what you're doing is to examine it, see it, work with it.
Yeah. And to develop kindness to oneself.
Actually, we're almost out of time, but Mark and Valerie have something.
Okay. Mark?
I think Valerie was before me.
Okay, Valerie?
Quickly, thank you. Thank you so much, Barry, and John, and everybody here. And thank you, Meg, for raising the issue of, you know, this, where does fear? Jane, I think, brought that up too. I mean, what is this? In my experience, I experience it physically, and I want to punch it. I want to fight that. Say, stop that. Stop the shaking. Stop, you know, panic, because I had a very aggressive ex-husband, and I still can, you know, feel that when there's a phone call or something comes up. But lately, I try to leave space, and I just like let him talk. And it's like, oh, maybe there's something interesting there. But with an ex-boss, all the cortisol just comes out. So just to be reminded to be gentle with myself and have a heart, and it's like, yeah, I could practice this in a different way. And many stories, it's all fiction. It's in here. More, I want more in here to open. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Valerie.
Mark, you're the last.
Hi, thank you guys. I was just thinking of a story where I crossed the street and I was on a sidewalk and somebody drove out of a blind driveway, and I literally, if I was one step extra, going into his driveway, which again, I was still on the sidewalk, he would have run me over. And then he comes in and he's going fast. And he comes, I see he's in the window of his car, and I look at him and I'm like, what the hell? And my question is, can't we all be the teacher sometimes too? I mean, he's going to kill somebody. He's in a driveway that has several cars. And is it wrong for me? I mean, if I sat there and start throwing kisses and saying peace and love, or, oh, you'll get me next time. What do you?
Well, you know, in the chapter, he does talk about how sometimes aggression may be warranted. He said, if you're the teacher, but
I think in this case, I could be.
Possibly, but you know, being aggressive takes a toll on yourself.
Yes, it does, but I don't know. In this case, I thought it was an okay thing to. I don't think I would have felt good being so loving in that moment. You know, just, oh, come here, let me give you a big hug.
Well, friends,
on to the next life.
So we should close because it's that time. We do have the discussion group tomorrow. If you want to come, and we'd love, be wonderful. These discussion groups are really good, I think, really great. People make terrific contributions. So tomorrow after meditation in the evening, we have a discussion of this again. So Lodro, I'll put up the dedication of merit, I hope, if I can get my mouse to work. There we go. And so I'm going to mute everybody. Hold on a sec. And Lodro, unmute yourself.
So we close our gathering by dedicating the merit for the benefit of all sentient beings. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Great
you, everyone.
To see you.
Thanks, Al.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, Lodro. Thanks, John. Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, great information.
Hey, Ellen.
Randy,
Best one yet.
I met somebody the other day. Oh, well, they're gone, I think.
But
Bye.
Bye. Nice to meet you, Julie.